Again, just wanted to say hello to everybody. Welcome to the Cover Crops and Orchard Systems webinar hosted by the Madera Chowchilla RCD. We're excited to have you all here with us today, and we hope you learn some resourceful information regarding cover crops in the San Joaquin Valley. We have an excellent panel of presenters with us today, and I just wanted to take a brief moment to introduce each of them to you before the presentation begins. And so to start, I'm going to be introducing our first presenter for you, which is Dr. Jeff Mitchell. And Dr. Mitchell works as a cooperative extension cropping system specialist with UC Davis. He has worked with many farmers in the San Joaquin Valley on the use of cover crops and reduced disturbance practices. He is very excited to see the resurgence of interest in cover cropping that is so strong today. And the next presenter is Cary Crum. Cary Crum works as a crop consultant at California Ag Solutions. The majority of Cary's career has been working in ag sales and marketing for the fresh produce industry. He also has 10 years of hands-on farming experience in trees and vines. It's this combined experience that allows him to bring the kind of support and solutions growers need to overcome any problems and achieve optimum results. The next presenter after Cary is Vivian Wauters. Vivian is a postdoc at the University of California, Davis. She is broadly interested in agroecosystem diversification and how research in collaboration with other forms of knowledge and expertise can build capacity for enhanced multifunctionality in agricultural systems. Prior research has focused on the intersection of cover crops for enhanced multifunctionality, of cover crops and soil health in Midwest vegetable rotations. Currently, she is working with growers, researchers, advisors, and nonprofits to integrate cover crops into almond orchards and understand what happens when we do that. And next, we have Margaret-Smither Kopperl. Margaret is manager of the 106-acre USDA-NRCS Lockeford Plant Materials Center in California's Central Valley since 2010. The CAPMC supports NRCS in California by testing plant species, including cover crops, and is a site to demonstrate soil health. Her agricultural experience started in England with fruit and vegetable production. Her PhD is in plant pathology from Michigan State University and included research into soil-borne disease of cherry. Since then, she worked at the University of Florida in private industry and was employed by the USDA-APHIS prior to moving to her current job. And next we have Stephanie Anagnoson. Stephanie is the Director for Water and Natural Resources for Madera County. She oversees the county's groundwater sustainability agency and a flood control agency and is a geologist. And lastly, we have Christina Beckstead. Christina has a Juris Doctorate as well as a bachelor's degree in agriculture business economics from CSU Fresno. Her roots run deep in agriculture as she was raised on a dairy and plays an active role in promoting agriculture in organizations, including the Farm Bureau and California Women for Agriculture. And with that, I'd like to pass this on over to Jeff Borum to begin the presentation with an Indigenous land acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy. Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for coming. Jeff Borum here, Soil Health Coordinator from East Stanislaus Resource Conservation District. And as Amy said, I'd like to do a short Indigenous land acknowledgement. I'll just say that the land I'm working on right now is that of the Sierra Miwok, as well as bands of the Yokuts. And then I often work in the land of the Talawa Deni, as well as the Chetco and Yurok. If you're interested in finding out whose land you're on or where you're working, please check out native-land.ca, and Amy can put that in the chat for y'all. Thanks so much for coming to this presentation, and I will hand it over to one of my mentors, Dr. Jeff Mitchell. Take it away, Doc.
Thank you very much, Jeff, first of all, and thank you, Amy, very much as well there. This, to all of the participants this morning, this has been a really outstanding group of people to be involved with here on the program, and I'm very honored to share with you some information this morning. I'm going to tag team with my good colleague, Cary Crum, and we're going to split up the time together there. What I'd like to do, first of all, is this is going to be a little bit of a different take on this. I'm going to start off, frankly, broad stroke this morning with looking at some what I call economic motivators for why folks might be interested in cover crops. Second of all, we'll look at some of the benefits that we locally here in the Central San Joaquin have found from the long-term use of cover crops. And then Cary's going to wrap the first few minutes up of our shared presentation with showing you some truly state-of-the-art innovative applications of cover crop principles there. So let me just start off with the economic angle here. A good friend of mine is shown here. He's a farmer back in Pennsylvania, and his name is Steve Groff. And as you look at the bottom right-hand corner of this slide here, you can see that he has a side business in addition to being a farmer of cover crop coaching. He also recently, last year in the fall, he wrote a book called The Future Proof Farm. And what he does in that book is shown in this quotation here. He asks the question very directly to farmers, is your farm becoming obsolete? There are changes coming over the horizon in our industry that have ripple effects and are forcing farmers to make difficult decisions about how they manage their soils. The reality is you will become face to face with the supply chain that you are part of. Now, I know that's kind of a bold in your face statement, but what Steve is arguing is that if you don't create the kinds of production systems with improved performance, you may be losing your markets. You may not have anybody to sell to anyway. That very same point was made in a workshop that I took part in a year ago as well. Nestle's company, I don't know if you all know this, but it's the largest food buyer in the world. It also is the largest food seller company in the whole world. The vice president once said this to the audience: if you want to sell your food to us, you'll meet our specifications. So my point here is that there is a growing, shall I say, groundswell of momentum that purchasers, the marketplace, is beginning to think very seriously and strenuously about how they want food to be produced. And I think this is going to lead us into a role for cover cropping. Something also that I want to share, and both Cary and I have been part of this for quite some time now, but in a couple of months or so, there's going to be a major evidence-based, place-based, and market-driven effort that's going to be launched in Northern California. It's called Regen 1. And what it's going to do is try to actually reward farmers for their regenerative ag practices through the marketplace. There will be what are called on the right side here, coordinated purchasing commitments that farmers can access, and also that farmers will be able to take part in telling their story. What are they doing to improve the performance of their overall food production system? So my point in all of this is that there are economic drivers that are out there that are probably unprecedented from whatever we've had before. A second reason, particularly with respect to why cover crops might be an important practice, is shown here. I'm not sure if too many of us over in the Central San Joaquin are aware of this, but just 2 weeks ago, in the Central Coast Regional Water Control Board, the board actually decided in a formal legal way that they are going forward going to endorse the use of cover crops as a means for farmers to gain credits, nitrogen credits for their production systems. The way things are regulated right now, it's shown in that equation in the bottom there. Farmers have to take heed of how much nitrogen they're applying. They subtract the amount is removed by the harvested crop. And that little simple subtraction then gives you the amount that's potentially discharged. Well, if you're growing cover crops in your system, the evidence now that this was the evidence and the case for this law has now been made by a group of scientists over there in the Salinas area. And they have shown that if you have a cover crop that has a low or a relatively high carbon to nitrogen ratio of 20 or more, and it's 4,500 pounds of dry matter per acre in the cover crop growing period, and you're growing it for 3 or more months in the off season, that you may be eligible for that kind of a credit in your production system. So that has real management impact right now. And that's the first time in California that kind of an insertion into the existing framework of policy has been made. So there's an opportunity to extend the use of cover crops more widely. Let me see, I'm having trouble with there we go. Let me just ask the question now, with that as background, do we have any evidence that soil function, soil health, or soil quality are actually declining in California orchards? And I show this not to be in your face at all here, but in our work with orchards, this is frankly not an uncommon sight to see. Water that's ponded either from fan jet or sprinkler or drip irrigation systems. And the shot on the right there is actually an orchard farmer that actually was creating a channel there to get rid of that. We've done work in a variety of different orchards throughout the Central Valley to look at the roles that cover crops might have in this situation. And I would like to share with you some information from one of the 2 long-term soil health research sites that are in California that are part of the Soil Health Institute's program overall. What we have been doing out in 5 Points for about 20 years now, we've just been adding winter cover crops to the system. And we've seen that just by capturing photosynthesis energy in the form of cover crop, we've added about 32 tons of organic matter or 15 tons of carbon to the system. Now, every year you don't get a great cover crop. You can see in 2007 there, we didn't have the rains and we didn't get a lot of cover crop. But overall, we got about 4,500 pounds or 4.25 or 2.25 tons of dry matter into the system from cover crops. To look at infiltration that I showed you the picture of before, the data, the labels here are kind of confusing, but if you imagine taking an inch of water and timing how long it takes to get that inch of water into the soil and doing that for 4 different sequential inches here, you can see that the time in seconds over on the y-axis for the no-till cover crop system is very fast. It takes only a few seconds to get even 4 inches of water to infiltrate the soil. Whereas if you don't have cover crops and you're just doing regular old tillage there, it takes quite a bit longer. So let me show you, I'd like to show you an example of this, what this looks like. This video is going to show you the impacts of using cover crops on the right-hand side there and not using cover crops on the left. So what we have is what's called a rainfall simulator. We have the non-cover crop thing on the right side of this view, and we have different trays below the apparatus there. We added the same amount of water to both of those trays. So there goes the one for the convention or the bare exposed ground. And then in a second, we'll add the same amount of water, and you'll be able to see in somewhat dramatic terms. So the water's just dripping through the holes in the simulator there, and we'll see what we get at the end of this. Now, if you've never seen this kind of a thing here, either in the field or in this simulation that I'm showing you with the video here, I was a little skeptical that it was going to work, first of all, until I actually saw it myself there. So on the right, you got the standard bare ground, and on the left, there's the cover crop system. The rain is starting on the cover crop now, and just watch what's happening. Already the water at the bottom of that tray, it's already infiltrated in the soil. You can see the water coming out through the bottom, meaning that it's going through the soil and being infiltrated into the soil. In a second, then the bare ground one will start. Here it goes. And see what you see in terms of the what happens to the water? Within a matter of seconds, the water is essentially running off the surface there, and it's hard to see, but the water is really not going into the soil there. And we'll get some different angles on this in a second there. So if you've never seen this, this is actually coming from 20 years of cover cropping. The soil has spread apart. It's slaked, it's created a crust, and that's the amount of water that has run off with just the amount of water compared to the amount that is actually in the soil that is infiltrated under the cover crop system there. So granted, it's a bit of show and tell and a simulation that's not in the field there, but the same kinds of things. We infiltrated 8 times the amount of water with the cover crop, and we had 44 times the amount of water run off without the cover crop. It's kind of dramatic there. Another thing that farmers, that some of you might be interested in doing yourselves, is looking at how your soil stays together in terms of its aggregation. What you do is you have this little test kit that has a sieve or a screen on the bottom. You drop a clod in there, and then you watch and observe, and you relate what happens to that clod to the scoring system there. A higher score would indicate greater stability. The soil is staying together as aggregates there. And we've measured this from our long-term work in 5 Points, and we've seen that if you have a cover crop in your system, you tend to have greater stability of your soil there. Another thing that some of you might want it to do, this is actually a mobile phone app. It's called Slakes, S-L-A-K-E-S, and it refers to the way that soil spreads apart, or it slakes when it's wet. The way this works is you take your mobile phone and you shoot an image above a little clod in a petri dish or a plate of water there, and over 10 minutes, the mobile phone app will calculate how much that clod or that aggregate has spread apart, has dispersed or slaked. And you can have a very accurate way of measuring the stability of your aggregates just by using your mobile phone. And you can see up close and personal what's happening here. This is actually kind of a microscope shot here of a clod, an aggregate in the water. This one here, right before our eyes, is falling apart. It doesn't have good structural integrity. If I move this along, that was a poorly aggregated soil. Here's one that is much more developed and with more aggregation. It's not falling apart. This is a soil that has had cover crops for about 21 years. So I belabor some of this stuff, just not to do too much on this show and tell stuff, but it is interesting, and we've measured these things more technically. Now, I bet you I'm not the only person that watches television here. And one of my personal motivations is to be on the America's Got Talent for the magic section of this show. I don't know if I'm going to make it here, but let me show you the sort of magic that I've been working on here. We have 4 cylinders in this thing. 2 of them on the left are from the standard no cover crop system, and the 2 jugs on the right are from the cover crop system that we've had for 20 years now. And you can see, again, right before your eyes, the structural integrity is quite different from these soils. We, again, have measured these with laboratory techniques and the kinds of protocols that scientists use there. But just to give you a visual impression here, it's very, very dramatic. So we have seen dramatic improvements in the soil physical properties with the result of cover crops. I'm going to turn it over to Cary in a minute here, but before I do so, I want to share something that caught my eye in the Fresno Bee. This was an editorial on one of the Sunday newspapers a while back, and this little section that I circled in yellow there, it caught my eye. Interesting cover crop tests in operation on Hayes Ranch. This was a ranch right here in the county where we're holding this webinar in Madera County. And the date on that article, I actually contacted the author of this article. She told me it appeared in the Madera Tribune in 1930. So I want to close by introducing my colleague here. in saying that, you know, there's not a whole lot new to what we're doing, except the way we're going to start with innovative practices. So with that, I'll look for questions in the chat, and I want to give time to Cary Crum, who's really going to share some very impressive applications of the use of cover crops in working orchards. Thank you all very much.
Can you guys see me and see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So my name is Cary Crum. I'm from California Ag Solutions, as Jeff has mentioned. I'm a crop consultant. I head up our regenerative agricultural program, as well as our cover cropping program. We cover crop in all sorts of systems, but we're going to talk today about specifically cover cropping in almond orchards. So I'm going to share quite a few pictures and just a little bit of talking, and then we will I need to start my timer here. We will hopefully give you some information that you can use and apply in your okay. So normally what you guys would see is a normal system in the fall. This is an almond orchard down in Lemoore, California. Orchards in the next picture things that you may see in your own orchards with in the summertime when we have water infiltration issues, and I would say in California year. So you can tell the trees even looked a bit stunted because they're just not getting. It's about a 14 to 15 hold on here. I lost it here. Bear with me. Hold on. I lost my screen. Sharing. Let me share again. Here we go. Hopefully this is back. Okay, I think I'm back. Okay, let's see, we're going to keep rolling through this. So this is a more traditional
Cary, can you hear me?
after we've mowed that first cover crop, as you can see, it's down about 4 to 6 inches, and we're allowing it to grow back. We do mow it several times during the season.
Cary, can you hear me? This is Stephanie, one of the panelists. Cary, your audio has been cutting out a lot, so I'm wondering if Amy might want to pause it, at least on the county connection. We may want to go to the next presenter, and you may want to call in for audio help. sometimes I just call in using the phone number and that helps. And I'm sorry, Amy, if I overstepped. I
Oh,
hope.
no, you're fine. I went ahead and I sent him a direct message. I'm not sure if you guys could see me right now, but if we want to move on, and I apologize for the connectivity issue, but if we want to move on to Vivian and we could move on to her presentation. And then at the very end, if Cary's able to gain access, we could end with his presentation. So let's plan on doing that. So Vivian, if you wanted to start your presentation, and then I'll get in contact with Cary on his presentation.
That sounds great. And I think they tie into each other. So hopefully they'll have some synergies. So I am going to share my screen now. Let's see where that is. Okay. All right. Can you all see my screen and hear me? Hearing no, yes. Oh, great. Okay. So I am Vivian, like Amy said. I'm a postdoc at UC Davis, and where I work mostly on Patwin lands, and I live in Nisenan lands. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Jeff, for providing that broad overview. And I'm really excited to see the pictures that Cary has, because I also work in almond orchards, and I'm going to provide some research updates from cover crops in almond orchards for some research that we've been doing on those cover crops. So like Jeff said, cover crops are definitely not new. Indigenous people actually have been managing these crop rotations with understory croppings for centuries. And in the UCCE, we've been doing evaluations of cover crops since the early 1920s. So there have been many investigations, and those have obviously even made it into the news. And you can see some pictures here that are in the archives of testing cover crop root structures and growth of different types of cover crops. And so really what my work has been as part of the Godin and Williams labs at UC Davis has been looking at, so what have we learned in the past century? And what more do we need to know in order to implement cover crops in almond systems?
Hello?
Oh, Cary, I think you're back on. Oh, okay, never mind. So what we have found so far is that cover crops definitely do have the potential to address multiple production and sustainability challenges, whether that is from looking at cover crops affecting soil, where they can help build up soil health, or harnessing benefits and fostering above ground organisms, and also through reduction in pest insects and weeds. And it creates this more creative, competitive environment for pests, and then synergies for your trees and systems. So it all works together. And we've been measuring a few of those things through a project located at various positions throughout the state. So the project that I'm mostly going to be talking about today, the research results is from a 3-site project in Tehama, Merced, and Kern counties, where we were looking at 2 different types of cover crops. One is a soil mix, which has a variety of brassicas, grasses, and legumes. And Margaret later on is going to be talking about some of the different varieties of cover crops. We'll get into that. And then a specifically pollinator mix, so things that flower, which was all brassica varieties. So I'm going to talk through some of the results that we found in that study. So at a really basic level, what I end up talking with growers a lot about is the difficulty of harvest, right? It's a barrier for growers wanting to implement cover crops. And what we found is that cover crops don't necessarily interfere with clean alleyways. So this is a cover crop in March down in Arvin, and then what the harvest looked like in the fall. And we found that this is on a commercial orchard, and there weren't problems with harvest, and there wasn't additional residue. In fact, what we find is that cover crops can really support high yields while not interfering with harvest. And for that breakdown, in order to not have any residue at harvest, if that's a concern for you, balancing the carbon to nitrogen ratio so that the plants break down faster. Legumes can be really helpful for that. Sorry if you can hear, I'm getting notifications on my computer, sorry about that. Terminating can be important for the timing of how you manage it, and having somebody who's experienced to help figure out when that might be. So leaving it until post-bloom was important in order to get benefits for pollinators, but then after that, as it gets older, mowing or using herbicide in order to terminate the cover crop. And potentially, we may not need to have such a clean floor in the future. So thinking towards off-ground harvest, there may actually be really other opportunities. What we found in the research is that there were no negative impacts of cover crops on yield, and that actually there were trends toward yield increase in really compacted orchards, up to 225 pounds of almonds per acre. That was in our second year. So we have this benefit of it not negatively impacting the system and potentially helping. And then there's also other issues that we can look at. So one of the things that cover crops change is the water relations. So in this visual, thank you to Dr. Jeff for this, we can see there's differences in how water moves through a cover crop soil surface versus a bare soil surface. So in a cover crop surface, as you saw in the videos, we have increased water infiltration. There's also a cooler soil surface temperature because the sun isn't directly hitting the soil surface. There's dew and moisture that is trapped in the canopy. And then there's also transpiration from the cover crop, just like there is from your tree. In contrast, in a non-cover crop system, which we can see on the right side of this slide, we have increased soil temperature, the soil water evaporation, so the bare soil is also going to evaporate, soil surface sealing and runoff, and then there's lower infiltration. And we saw some of this in the studies that we've been doing. For example, not somewhere that we were taking data on, but David Dahl sent this to my advisor, Dr. Gaudin, in 2017 of orchards that were across the road. So more visuals of what it looks like to have something that has roots in the soil and is covering the soil surface prevents that runoff. This this is one of the pictures from Jeff's slides that my advisor often uses of what happens when you don't have any ability for the water to infiltrate into the soil. It goes off to the edge of the orchard. And so when we measure this in our own study, what you can see in the graphs is that in 2 of the 3 sites, when using the soil mix, which was that mix that had the brassicas, legumes, and grasses, we had higher infiltration rates. So thinking about the bare soil and the cover crop soil that Dr. Jeff showed the picture of, we're getting more of that infiltration going into the soil as opposed to running off of the edge. What we find for soil properties is that cover crops can improve soil structure and they support microbial communities in the short term. Although increases in carbon storage and this idea of carbon credits, which is definitely in the air, people are talking about it, is more uncertain. So in the studies that we've been doing in almonds, we found that we did not get an increase in soil organic carbon, which is the way that we measure the amount of carbon that is in the soil, but there was definitely improved aggregation. So thinking of the slake test that Dr. Jeff showed, whether that soil clod breaks apart in the water, whether it can hold together. And we also had a decrease in compaction. There's also really quick responses to the soil biology. And from what I've heard of Cary, he definitely has seen many of these things. And I'm excited to hear more about sort of the practice that he's seen across many, many orchards of that life in the soil. And we found that there were decreases in sodicity when there was cover on the soil. And so maybe because of that infiltration, we want to look into that, whether the infiltration is leading to there being a decrease in sodicity because water is flushing those salts through. If you look on the graph on the right-hand side, what we found in a related study looking at a variety of different practices, so not just cover crops, but maybe permanent ground cover, integrating animals into the system, and various other ways that an orchard can really differ from being bare ground, is that we have higher soil organic matter as we increase the biodiversity. So this is 8 to 10-year-old nonpareil orchards, so they've been managed very differently and having a lot more biodiversity over the long term. And you do get increase in soil organic matter, but it does seem like cover crops alone maybe can't get us to that increased soil organic matter. It's more of a systemic change that needs other other additions to it. When we look at pollinators, which has definitely been in the news for how we can support pollinators in our orchards, we find that cover crops can be managed for pollinator resources for flowers without negatively affecting bee pollination services. So older resources have cautioned growers to mow any flowering vegetation at the beginning of almond bloom because it will compete. So the idea is that bees will get distracted from the almond blooms and they'll go to the cover crop blooms. But what we found is that that's not the case. So flowers in wildflower plantings that are adjacent to orchards don't compete for the almond, for the bees. The bees have plenty of time to go to both of them. We also know that diverse diets, which are provided by providing more flowers and longer sources of forage, result in healthier bees. And healthier bees are better to improve the pollination services that growers are paying for. And so cover crops can provide that diverse pollination. So what we've seen in the graph that's there on the left is that most of the honeybees that we tracked in this study went for these brassica species because that was mostly what was flowering at the time when the cover crops were flowering. And you can see there's some blooms in the picture. However, achieving that bloom synchrony is definitely not trivial. So it's not every single cover crop is going to bloom when the almonds bloom. And so planting early, which means planting before November, having supplemental irrigation, because when you put seeds in the ground is not necessarily when those seeds come up. So having irrigation to help with germination, and then having a mowing strategy so that the cover crops are actually able to flower so that you don't need to drive over all of them for sanitation or need to mow for some reason, waiting for mowing until after those cover crops have been able to bloom and provide that service. And so there's definitely some management learning curves that are associated with that. Turning then to another issue that we hear from growers is whether or not there's frost risk that's increased with cover crops. And what we found with only 1 year of data, and so we'd like to go back and study this more, is that they may pose less frost risk than conventionally thought, and that management can mitigate those concerns. So what we did find is that cover crops do decrease the soil temperature. However, they don't decrease the ambient air temperature at 3 to 5 feet in the study plots that we were looking at. And so they may not increase the frost risk in the canopy, but could keep soils cooler. And you can always mow or irrigate for frost control whenever you need to, or grow something that's low growing so that it's not quite so large and isn't having that detrimental effect. There's also been some research that the cover crop is reflecting sunlight back into the canopy and therefore increasing the amount of photosynthesis that happens in the tree, which could offset some of those concerns. So there's a lot more to be looked at there. Also, we have some knowledge about what species and varieties are well suited to California, but there's never going to be one single thing of what you should plant. And I know that Margaret is going to talk a little bit more about this. I'll be curious to hear what Cary has found. There are some studies, so in the research literature, there's all of us researchers, there's some people who say, no, you should have fewer species because they can accomplish one goal really well. And then others who say, no, we need more biodiversity to accomplish multiple goals. But most of that research has been done in annual cropping systems in the Midwest or the Mid-Atlantic. So it's not really California specific. And so the NRCS is really important for studying some of those mixes, and growers and are really important for testing what actually is working here in California so that we can build up the knowledge of what we can actually use here. Lastly, one of the things that we looked at in this study, there was a team with Dr. Sam Sandoval and Alyssa De Vicentis and Ellen Bruno looked at the cost benefit analysis. And what they find is that cover crops are not profitable on the short term. So if you look at some of these basic costs, seed, planting, labor time, depreciation of machinery and opportunity costs, and then look at the benefits, it takes a while for the cost to outweigh the benefits. However, we can't monetize all of the costs and all of the benefits, and there's a lot more variation across every grower's operation. But what they found is that it takes about 7 to 10 years to get a positive net economic return on cover cropping. However, just because cover crops are a longer term thing does not mean it's not worth it, because your trees, your orchard is also a long-term investment. And so this could also shift depending on how they're managed and what your other management practices are. And so with that, I'm going to just briefly talk about some key knowledge gaps and where we're going next. So I've been working with a number of collaborators, some of whom are on this call, for developing a best management practices in almonds. And that will be coming out soon, which has sort of what we know so far about how to manage cover crops in almonds. And we hope that we can improve it, maybe with your collaboration, with your insights. And then there's definitely more work to be done. There's current research on how cover crops interact with navel orangeworm management, a full water balance of where the water is going, because people are really concerned about conserving water, how to figure out about nitrogen movement and potential nitrogen benefits, more about that soil carbon and how much we're getting or how much we're not getting and what practices we need to do for that. And then more about species specifics and sort of the cause and effect of what you're planting where. So thank you to all of you for your attention. And this is the team that has been working on all of these things before I was there. There's my email and phone number. And thank you so much for your attention. So it may be that Cary could potentially go now, or we could have some questions. There can also be some time for questions at the end, or we can move on. Let's see, there's a question. Let me scroll up to see. I don't see, how long has the frost study been going on? Yeah, so the data that I presented are from one single year. There are a couple of different studies going on through various labs to look at frost, but there hasn't been a consistent study going on. So when I arrived last July, that was something that has sort of been, it's a ball that keeps getting picked up and thrown to various people. Right now, as I've heard from a few growers, like, you know, it's just not worth the risk without knowing more. And so I think that that is a call to us as researchers to definitely do more research. But there was one good year of data on that, and there's one ongoing study, but we don't have the results analyzed yet for that. And there will be more studies going in, just putting the measurement tools in. And the reason that that can happen and can be difficult to get good long-term data and multi-year data is just that you have this big bulky tower in the middle of an orchard. And so that can be difficult to do in commercial orchards because you need to do your management. And so figuring out where we can actually put those so that they aren't interfering with what a grower needs has been somewhat of a challenge, and I think is one of the reasons why some of the data is a little spotty still. But stay tuned and we will hopefully be able to answer that with more certainty. So another question, the status of water use of cover crops compared to cover crops in orchard. Does it use more water or less, more fertilizer or less? So more water or less, what we found in this study is that the water use, the soil moisture content was mostly the same under the bare and the cover cropped treatments. And Dr. Jeff may be actually in a better position to speak about this because he was there for some of that work and led some of the data collection on that and knows more about it than I do. I know about it from being in the lab. Previous research from the BIOS program in almonds, where they were looking at cover crops, this was in the 90s, found that cover crops did use some percentage more depending on the species, and that kind of varied. So That's why I said there's definitely more research to be done on the full water balance of whether cover crops are, so cover crops use water, but bare soil also will have evaporation. And so the soil moisture level may not change. And I think we need to know more about that in order to guide whether you're getting credits for water or whether cover crops are being treated as more of a problem. More fertilizer or less, that is still somewhat up in the air, and it depends so much on orchard specific factors. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret.
Thank you. I am trying to share my screen right now and get going on this. Can you hear me? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for all the speakers, Jeff. Very interesting as always, and Vivian also very helpful. Yeah, I'm carrying on, and I have to say though, Vivian, I don't actually have very much information on specific cultivars in this particular talk. I only had 20 minutes. We do have information. We've done studies on that, and it's available on the PMC website, which you can search for. You can just search. I should have put it on the screen. It's on the end. You can Google Lockeford Plant Materials Center. We have a publications page, and there's information on our work into different cultivars, which was eye-opening for me, actually. I was really surprised the differences, particularly, for example, with cereal rye and tillage radish, just amazing. And also there's older work by UC Davis, particularly, for example, on triticale cultivars, which we haven't worked on. So with that, I'll go on into this talk. So what I'm going to talk about is the different considerations you have to make if you're making a decision to cover crop, whether you want cool season or warm season cover crops, though with almonds and orchard crops, I think it'll be mostly cool season, although I did have a request from a producer recently who was planning to grow warm season cover crops. And then I'll finish up with some information about a cover crop case study we did looking at soil health parameters in walnuts. So this is a cover crop planning support tool that we developed for NRCS. We want our planners to use it, but the aim was it's helpful for everyone. And this came out of when people come at you and they say, I want a cover crop, and you're like, okay, you have 20 questions running through your head. You want to know more about things that maybe they haven't even thought about before you can come up with a good answer. So this is that, and you will have a copy of that provided to you by Amy. So the first question is, what are the resource concerns? And by this, we are talking about soil, water, air, just the environmental issues you want to solve with your cover crop. So for example, I know example from a producer down in your area whose soils are very sandy, and after started using cover crops, and I think initially they didn't look that great, but he noticed, but they do tend to get better over time depending on the year, and he noticed that his trees were looking less stressed where the cover crops were, and that over time the need for irrigation was lessened. Another example is a producer in the Delta with a heavy clay soil, again growing almonds. The soils were so heavy and they cracked in the summer with cracks big enough that during harvest there would be almonds falling down into the cracks. Now that is a big economic loss, obviously, and so cover cropping solved that problem. So it depends what are the concerns, and you need to understand the cropping system. What's the crop? What are your management requirements? So obviously for almonds, that's clean floor for harvest, whereas walnuts or pistachios, that's not the same level of concern. So that makes a difference on what you can plant. What's your cover crop window? Again, almonds are picky. You need, if you look trying to get pollinator bloom at the same time as the almond bloom, so there's forage for bees, then you may actually need to irrigate your cover crop up in the fall if there's no rain in time. So just to be sure, because even, you know, we try and even perhaps mid-October, you might need to plant a little earlier to be sure of that. You need to know which weeds are prevalent. A lot of our valley orchards, maybe they've used so many herbicides. Perennial weeds are not a problem, but others you may have, you know, perennial malva or something that is kind of awful. And our annual weedy grasses, of course, can be really competitive with pollinator plantings. And then what equipment is available, go into that in a little more detail. And of course, the big one is irrigation, and not just irrigation, but water. So site prep, you have the choice if you're going to plant no-till or if you're going to use tillage. No-till, you might need to mow a herbicide prior, maybe probably not for almonds, but it's possible. And then tillage may need more operations, but you need to think about all these things. With planting, is it going to be no-till, as I said, which actually no-till drills as range drills. I mean, this last picture is actually a range drill on the bottom left, do really well in orchard situations. Or are you going to broadcast? But if you broadcast, you've got to have really good soil seed contact, otherwise you're going to get a very poor stand. And irrigation and water availability. So do you plan for the cover crop to be entirely rain fed, which that like some years, like this past year, it's pretty poor. You're not going to get a whole lot of biomass. If you have an irrigation system, what kind is it? Is the water available to start a cover crop? Even if there is an irrigation system, again, this is not a poor year for that. And if you, what kind of irrigation system? So for drip or even micro sprinkler, you can have two environments. Moisture under the trees, desert in the rows. So you need to think about what's going to grow under those circumstances. Termination. So mowing or swathing is very common. Personally, I like mowing. I think if you just mow everything down, you leave the residue on the surface, it's leaves the surface undisturbed, you get cooling effect from the residue. Hay or silage production is possible, but of course then it's not really a cover crop, and certainly not for NRCS to count as cost share or anything. The roller crimper is widely used in the Midwest. In the picture on the right is actually the PMC mowing down Sudan grass, and it looks lovely, but you come out 3 days later and those plants are standing upright again. And I have seen a roller crimper used successfully in an orchard in California, but that was a custom, very heavy roller crimper and a very robust, viney cover crop that was rolled down. Then disking, but of course, disking leads to loss of carbon, soil moisture, and disruptions to the soil structure. And in California in the summer, if you disc in the start of the summer and you have your soil baking away through the entire summer with really high soil temperatures, all the soil microbial activity in the surface layer is going to be killed. Winter kill can work with warm season cover crops. And then we have grazing, and I know Amelie is doing some work with sheep in vineyards and maybe walnuts as well. So that's really interesting. And of course, you could always use herbicides if you wanted. Oh, and then one other thing I want to say, timing of your cover crop termination is really critical, because we have found at the PMC using moisture sensors that, and this is a little different from Vivian, that early in the season, there's more moisture under the cover crops than in the bare ground. But there is a time in the spring when the cover crops are growing really fast and it's warming up, that it will start to suck water out of the soil. And that's the time you want to terminate. You want to trap that water in the soil under the cover. So as I said, the seasonal choice for annual cover crops is cool season, planted in fall or even in early spring, and they'll tolerate cold temperatures. There's a varying degree of drought tolerance depending on the species and the cultivar. And then with warm season plantings, you plant them in the spring. And you could, I mean, they can offer really good pollinator resources and so on. So I have a neighbor grows walnuts, and one summer he had an area planted cowpeas and buckwheat and was really happy with the effect on the soil and the pollinators. So this is from a publication that we have on the website. There's actually a link here, and it's like a periodic table for cover crops. We hedged this idea from the ARS to have one for the Midwest, but you know, we're back to the question when I came here. It might work in North Dakota, but is it going to work here? And these are all plants that we have grown in California, and we're confident that will do very well here. And in the book, there's a page for each of these, so you can actually look at the page and see how tall, how big the plant is likely to grow, if there are any issues with it, how deep it should be planted. There's just a lot of real basic information that you need to know when you're deciding what you want in your cover crop mix. And of course, you can grow single species, but we really often prefer to have mixes because it adds diversity to the system. And so with that, I will go into the next, which is just looking at the functional groups. The cereals and grasses, we all know they have fibrous root systems. They'll reduce erosion, increase infiltration. One of the things that they do very well is concentrate nitrogen and phosphorus in the soil. So if you're in a situation where you're particularly worried about erosion or runoff, these plants will hold the nitrogen, and then as they're mowed down and they decay slowly, it's released again, available to the plants. They're very good at weed suppression and disease suppression. One of the things when it comes to cultivars, I think it's really important to think about, especially with cereals, there are winter and spring cultivars. So the winter cultivars are, you know, used in the Midwest. They're designed to grow a little tiny bit in the fall, and then they prepare for winter and they go kind of dormant. They don't grow very much because they're waiting for it to get cold, and then they'll grow in the spring after the cold spell. The spring ones will start growing right away. Well, in California, we don't really get that cold. So we have found, for example, with triticale at the Plant Materials Center, we grow winter cultivars for certain things. If we want something to grow slow for over the winter, grow laterally, we'll keep it even mowed down. Whereas if we want something to grow quickly and straight up, then we'll pick a spring variety. So that's important to keep in mind. Peas are the same way, actually. So the next big one is the legumes. Now, of course, these fix nitrogen. And if you make a good selection, you may even be able to fix, you know, not even add additional nitrogen or add a very minimal amount, which is very good in our regulatory situation. However, the nitrogen fixation depends upon the bacteria rhizomes that, I'm going to see if you can see that. Here we go. See the nodules on the roots. These are bacteria that form these nodules, and they fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, but you will need to inoculate to be sure you have these. In some cases where you've had a lot of legumes growing, you might get away without adding them, but if you were a new cover crop producer, I would definitely inoculate. You need to buy fresh inoculum every year. So these are wonderful for nutrient cycling, and they have a good taproot, water infiltration, and pollinators, of course. The pictures here we have at the top is fava bean, bell bean. which is actually in the vetch family, but it grows straight up, so it's good for other legumes to climb up, and crimson clover, which is pretty. Most of these will support pollinators, and some will suppress weeds. But you need to be careful because some species may harbor pests and diseases, so you need to be sure which ones and check that out. Oh, what am I doing here? I'm getting distracted. Sorry, everybody. Getting distracted. Okay, brassicas and radishes. Okay, so these have a fantastic strong taproot, so they're wonderful for soil compaction, and they scavenge nitrogen. And that may be a case in our fields where a lot of people have been put on perhaps more fertilizer than they need for a long time. So these roots can go down really deep and bring nitrogen back up to the surface. On the PMC, we found that in tillage radish trials, we've had nitrogen in the surface biomass as high as hairy vetch, even when we haven't fertilized at all. So it's interesting. And like I said, they're wonderful for compaction. You see this root here. In the Midwest, these winter kill. For us, of course, they don't. When I first grew tillage radish, I was thinking, well, what the hell's going to happen? You're going to have a big root. What's going to happen? But it kind of goes to styrofoam. I think it stores water, and they act kind of like a little funnel down into the soil. Some species, a lot of them, as Vivian said, are wonderful for bees. Some of them suppress nematodes, like there's Nemphix, brassicas, and so on. So they're good for that. Okay, miscellaneous pollinators. I'm probably running out of time. There's a lot of cover crop selection guidance out here. I had just wanted to put in some lists from NRCS. You see the SARE program. There's a lot of information, so just search around. Okay, so you spend some time thinking about what your problems are. You look at the information about different species, talk to your seed producer or your seed salesman who's very knowledgeable, and you think you want to come up with something. But you need to think about seed size, because when you come to plant, you need to be sure that what you want to plant is compatible with the equipment that you actually have for planting, and it makes a big difference. So to the left here, there's a high biomass cover crop mix. Now see, that you could easily plant through a grain drill. But some of these smaller seeded things, not so much. You might have to add rice drill hulls if you had a grain drill. So it's just something to think about, because you don't want to be, oh dear, what happened? You don't want to be out to plant and then you found out that you've dumped all your small seeds in half your land area, and that's really not very good. Seed size does determine optimal planting depth. So, few tips on planting for success. Good soil to seed contact is essential. Consider your seed size, because that will depend on the planting depth. Rule of thumb is 2 times the diameter of the seed, so that high biomass cover will be planted, an inch or more deep. But some of the smaller seeds, if you plant them that deep, you're not going to get anything. How are you planting? Good quality seed from a reputable seed dealer. So it'll come with a tag. Make sure you plant at the recommended seeding rates for the species. So that's in the information that I have. You don't want to plant too heavy. For example, if you wanted to plant tillage radish because you have a compaction issue, you don't want to plant that too heavy, because if you did, then the plants are close together and they don't grow big roots. So small tips like that are important. Read your seed tag, purity and germination, use the PLS seeding rate, and do please calibrate the seeder. Okay, and the final thing, soil health. This is a case study we did. Well, actually, the agronomist at the Plant Materials Center, Valerie, mostly did it, and Sonia Miller from our Stockton field office. This was with a producer in Linden. walnuts. So he's got a very heavy clay soil, was interested in using more cover crops to see if he, because he was getting a lot of ponding and so on. So this picture shows the 4 mixes. There was an annual plow down mix, which is, you know, basically legumes and some cereals, an experimental mix with a lot of different things in it. There was a sort of standard brassica mix, and then triticale. So all these were tested for 3 years, and samples were taken. Oops, done it again. Okay, this is summary of the results. So you can see, and I don't probably have much time for this, but the word differences, obviously looking at species in bloom, the triticale does not bloom, the others did. And so that was a good resource for bees. The dry matter yields varied, and it was most with the experimental mix, but the brassica mix and annual plow down mix did pretty well as well. Amount of nitrogen added was really significant. Of course, triticale does not fix nitrogen, but there was this 57 pounds per acre in the above ground biomass. That's quite a lot. And then these others, you can see the experimental mix was highest, and the annual plow down mix was also really good. So this next page shows some more results from this. And there's a comparison here down at the bottom of this page with what was done in spring. Here we go. So you can see the infiltration was terrible right here, but then increased. This is infiltrate rate per hour. There was a reduction in bulk density, which is good. That shows that there's more water holding capacity and more volumetric water content. When it comes to the soil organic matter, there was actually an increase. You can see from the 2% here up to 7% for the brassica mix, and more up here for the annual plow down mix. But even the triticale, it helped because you're just building your soil. And so that is my talk. So do I have any questions? Let's have a look. And you know what? I cannot see because I'm still sharing. If I stop sharing, I should be able to. Oh yeah, and here there's contact information as well. Okay. I've stopped sharing. And do I see any questions in the chat? No, I do not. Does anybody have any questions?
It looks like there's a few. So one, a couple of questions about, is nitrogen available from the roots, specifically the nodules, or only from above ground growth?
Oh, that is an excellent question. And you know what? We measure above ground biomass and nitrogen because it's easy to measure. The amount that is, and I think, you know, as the plant is getting bigger, and we know that there are root exudates as the plant is growing, but I don't think we really know how much there is. We're actually trying to answer that question in a study at the PMC with fava bean, looking at if you terminate at different times, does it affect the amount of nitrogen that's going into the crop? That's a really good question. You know what I wish? I wish we had the, you know, like you have irrigation moisture sensors and you can tell how much moisture you have in your soil. I wish we knew how much nitrate and ammonium we had in the soil at any given time, which currently we do not do. So, this is a good question. I mean, the above ground biomass and the roots break down over time and then the nitrogen is released, but you know, there's also root exudates. It's a complicated question and I don't know the answer. Let's see. I see a question here. What native crops are nitrogen fixing? Burr clover, yeah, I would think so. Fillery, no, I don't think so. Fillery is probably grabbing up some nitrogen, and as it breaks down, it would be available. So it's certainly erosion control, but it's really legumes that fix nitrogen. Yeah, and somebody says about bell beans, populations of bean aphids. Yes, that's Rex. Okay, I can't, let's see if I go up here.
Did you see in the question and answer, there was one from Joel, and you could answer in text or live, but aside from the need to irrigate, are there other issues to be aware of with warm season cover crops?
No, I think okay, Vivian wants to go as well. Other than the, let's see.
No, thank you. No, I don't need to answer it. You can answer.
Okay, so it's kind of gone now. I can't read it anymore. What happened? I'm sorry, I can't see that picture, that question about what do we need to be aware of with warm season cover crops. You just need to know pests and diseases, I would think would be the main one. I'm a little cautious, like cowpea and tomato. I would not want those to go together, but there's a lot of work out of Florida, for example, growing sun hemp with tomatoes, and it suppresses nematodes and works really well. So you just need to know about IPM issues really with need to be part of your selection. I hear that cover crops will allow me to use less water and less nitrogen. Yes. However, research on this is mostly in the Midwest. Yes, the problem is that SGMA and programs used by GSAs might actually discourage the use of cover crops unless a net positive can be worked into. You're absolutely right. That's something I worry about a lot. I think we all worry about it. The work at the PMC, we have looked at that. That's why I was saying termination time is really important. I think, irrigation, the moisture sensors will help. And I think really knowledgeable producers who are really good with cover crops kind of know when they need to terminate. I remember a few years ago, we were having an open house at the Plant Materials Center. It was the beginning of April, and I knew that the cover crops were past it. We should have terminated them earlier, but you're having an open house, you don't terminate because you want to have something to show to the people who come. And I remember this gentleman from further south in the valley, he was sick, and he came up to me and he told me, you should have terminated this 3 weeks ago. And I was like, yes, you're right. How did you know? But he knew, you see. And I was at the soil health cover crop presentation this year from the Midwest, and they were saying one of the biggest things that led into success was experience, that producers who had 5 years of more experience of cover cropping just saved more money. So that was interesting. Let's see, any other questions that I'm not seeing open to? Let's see. Tony had a question about side by side, but now it's disappeared. You know what? I think I need to hand off to the next person, and then maybe we can handle more questions at the end. Oh my gosh, let's see, I'm looking at these more. Can I try and, I'll try and answer these in person. Do I have to do anything else, Amy, to hand over to the next person? Is Corey ready?
So I think he's trying to connect right now. So we're just going to check to see if he does have the connectivity. And
Okay.
if not, what we'll do is we'll move forward to Stephanie's presentation if he doesn't have connectivity.
It should be good.
Okay, yes, we hear you.
Great.
Let's just, you just need to add your video and then you're good to go.
It's saying that you're not, you have to allow me. It's telling me that the host has stopped it. should be good there. Let me share my screen. Here we go. So that should be good. I apologize about the connectivity issues. I'm out in the field today and I wasn't planning on having an issue. So can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so let me make sure that I can present this. Present mode, okay. All right, so kind of leaving off where I was, I wanted to just show you some pictures and just discuss a little bit about some of the techniques that we're using in orchards currently. So this is the first picture you saw there is a full-grown cover crop, and then we come in and we mow right behind it, leaving about 6 to 8 inches so we can get regrowth back fairly easily. This is this unique thing we've kind of been working on developing on planting a cover crop right along a drip hose that we can support with water in the wintertime if we don't have rain like we did this year. So I want to just cover a little bit about our cover cropping philosophy. It's a little different than what you may hear. We believe in planting big, diverse, multi-species cover crops. We like low biomass producers. We balance it kind of equally between grasses, legumes, broadleaf species, and we're after diverse root architectures. We want to plant the cover crop. Most of the traditional way you see is right down the center of the row in a small strip. We're finding that we want to get the cover crop either across the whole orchard floor or certainly focused near where the tree roots are. We get a much bigger bang for the buck with the trees and the biology. We view above ground biomass as a management problem. So we have a management system in place to deal with that. We're really focused more on below ground biomass. So trying to make the above ground biomass go away prior to harvest is a big focus of what we do. So I want to make sure that, you know, that is something that you guys understand. One of the things we're trying to do too is eliminate glyphosate from the system. The one thing we do not ever want to do is terminate a cover crop with glyphosate. The large biomass of roots down below, if you spray that and kill it with glyphosate, you can see some translocation of and some injury to the trees. So just be careful with that. So using different chemistries other than glyphosate or we typically mow. We don't use a roller crimper here. We just don't see it effective. We take a systems approach to cover cropping, which we kind of look at layering a cover cropping system directly into your production system. And so we need a systems approach, which I'll touch on in a minute. When you're choosing a cover crop, as you've heard before, we want to focus on the resource concerns, your issues in the field. Are you having infiltration issues? Are you having pest problems? Are you having salt accumulation? Are you having dust problems, that sort of thing? The last thing I want to talk here is we want to treat the cover crop with the same attention as your primary crop. The benefit that we have is to really affect the system and make it better, so we need to treat it and give it some love like we do our trees. So we talked about the systems approach to cover cropping. I get phone calls all the time with growers calling wanting to know if I have a mix for cover crop for their trees, and I always tell them that's the last question you need to be asking. So first thing you want to do is look at the soil issues, water infiltration, sodium accumulation. Before we ever get ready to plant a cover crop, we want to have a planting plan. We want to have a germination strategy. How are we going to get it out of the ground? Once we want to have an irrigation plan. We have to adjust to accommodate if we're going to have, for instance, if we're going to support the cover crop in the winter with the drip system, we want to be able to run water through the drip hose to get that accomplished. The biggest thing we like to try to do is to get the cover crop growing in the wetting zone so we can support it with the drip. That's where you get the biggest impact with the trees. Above ground biomass management plan, we want mowing timing, mowing frequency, type of mower we're going to use, what we're going to do with the cover crop before bloom. So what we're going to do to make it go away at the end before harvest. Getting into termination plan, we want to talk about when we're going to terminate it, how we're going to terminate it, herbicide selection, and then again, how we're going to make that cover crop disappear before harvest. Getting into harvest floor management, typically what we like to do is make sure it's nice and crispy dead by the first part of June. And then we want to come through with a flail mower and it'll pulverize the above ground biomass. And by harvest, you won't even see it was there. The other thing is looking at the fertility plan adjustments to overcome nutrient tie-up. When we put this big massive roots in the system, we're going to create competition with the trees, and the nutrients are there, but the microbes would prefer to chew on the biomass. So we want to make some slight fertility adjustments with timing for the following crop to make sure that we don't have any issues. The last thing, what I mentioned first, was the last question you should ask ever is what mix should I plant? That's the last question you ask, not the first. So talking about planting techniques, we do a couple different things. There's been mention of a broadcast. We can either do in the row middles or solid. We can use a conventional seed drill. Typically that requires pre-plant tillage. We've got to break up the floor and make some dirt loose so we can use a conventional drill. Planting depth is very important with the multi-species cover crop. We want to be between 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch deep. We get much better emergence. The best way to do the orchard floor to plant is with a no-till drill, which is a much heavier piece of equipment that puts a lot more weight on the disc openers, and we don't have to do any pre-plant tillage. So, and again, the shallow planting depth is important, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. One of the newest techniques we've been using and getting really big benefits out of is applying cover crop seed with an airplane over the whole orchard. We do it right before a big storm. Surprisingly enough, we get a great stand out of it, and we let it grow over the berms and the whole orchard floor. And then we typically will come in at about 6 to 8 inches of height on when the cover crop is growing on the berm, and we would treat that with a contact herbicide to stop it growing. But we get better infiltration rates by doing this. We really see in the future this could be a major way that we're going to start doing cover cropping. So it's a little bit different. Traditionally, we want to get seed to soil contact into a trench, but we're finding the air application is really changing the paradigm here on this cover cropping. Planting timing, which you heard some of that earlier, is super critical. So if you plant too early in the fall, you're going to get the down with a light rain, and then it's going to not have enough moisture to continue to grow, and you get a lot of dieback. So sometimes if we've got I like to tell growers to wait until after we've had a significant rain before we think about planting cover crop, which anymore is getting us into December. We see the window for cover cropping in almonds pretty much from late October all the way up until early February, depending on. Number two, planting with adequate soil moisture. So we want to make sure that we have enough moisture to not only get it germinated, but get it supported once it's growing, to get us into the best opportunity to have a good crop. One thing to think about is we always get rain. So look at historical averages. Even our driest year, we get around 4 inches of rain. So if we don't have rain in December, the historical averages tell us we will have 3 to 4 inches of rain in the spring. So it's okay to get your cover crop in because the rain will support it. One thing we talked about earlier too was planting solid between the rows. This gives us a much bigger benefit. We can germinate with fan jets, running them at high pressure and extending them deeper into the row and getting the crop at least germinated in the wetting zone, which is again where we're trying to get the infiltration benefits. We can use, if you have ponding in your orchard, we can get, if we plant up next to the berms, we can actually turn on the drip in the wintertime and actually let the water pond and put that water where the seed is and let it pond and let it get germinated. And we continue to come back and run, maybe a 1/2 inch of water once in a while in the wintertime to help that crop keep going before the rain comes. Again, the growth in the wetting pattern is the most important. This is, we do as a company, we do customized agronomy fertility plans, orchard specific cover crop blends to address issues. We have a planting equipment rental program. We have provide in-field leadership. We have regenerative practice implementation plans, production system evaluations, improvement, and irrigation plans and consulting services. That's my contact information. This is a picture of one of our orchard no-till drills. It's 11.5 foot wide. You can see the front attachments. We've put on really get in there and get seed into the orchard grooves in the soil. We got pretty good seed to soil contact, and in this particular system, we're planting against each side of the orchard, and we're leaving the middle open, about planting 4 feet off of the row each direction, and leaving the middles bare. This is another picture. I put it to germinate. You can see their little mass in the this was done this winter. We had no rain. We started actually growing this in December, and this was taken in early December or mid-December. As you can see, it's up out of the ground when most of it weren't growing. And there's a picture of the multi-species cover crop. Typically, we're looking at between 12 and 15 different species that we like to eat. The more, the better. And we're not so concerned about the cultivars. A lot of different species together. So here's a look down the tree row where we've. This is a traditional planting. We're down next to the row. We've left the berms empty. One thing to think about is if you look at where those trees are and you see there's nothing growing there, think about your tree roots, and under that area between the trees, we routinely have covered that with pre-emergent growing there. So I want to actually ask you to think about, when you look at that picture, do you think that the tree roots would be bit by something growing over the top of them? That's a lot of real estate to leave bare, and so that's why we're going to the more application to that growing. Also, not only are we talking about because you think that soil is affected by pre-emergence by being completely bare like that with years and years of application, I want you to ask if it's true that was not affecting your trees in some way. There's another look. This is 3.5, 4 feet now, and we're getting ready to cover crop. It's all over the place. And this is, everybody has a picture of a dog or a presentation, but it did. This is my dog, Lincoln, and he was enjoying a cover crop inspection. And that's it. That's me.
Hi, everybody. This is Stephanie Anagnoson from Madera County. We're going to transition to the next part of the presentation, which focuses more on the regulatory environment and specifically on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, as well as nitrate management. So I'm going to do the first part and talk a little bit about some things that are true in Madera County, but also can be translated to places around the state, since I know we have lots of people from around California on the webinar. So we'll talk through how to follow SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. I'll talk generally about supply augmentation and demand management strategies that would apply in many different places. And then we'll talk about SGMA and healthy soils and cover crops. So just to give you a sense of what SGMA has going on in our landscape in Madera County, this is a map of the valley floor portion of Madera County, and anything that is white, the counties were made responsible for. These are the so-called white areas that are undistricted. And then everything that has a color is an irrigation district. Large ones, Madera Irrigation District and Chowchilla Water District, and then some smaller ones, Gravelly Ford, Root Creek, Aliso. So every SGMA situation has GSAs, groundwater sustainability agencies, and there are 14 in Madera County. There's also 2 cities, one of which is its own GSA, the city of Madera, And then City of Chowchilla is part of the Chowchilla Water District Groundwater Sustainability Agency. We also have a regional water management group and a number of disadvantaged advocacy groups working. So there's a complicated landscape for understanding SGMA. So when you figure out how to follow SGMA, and people will call and just to have an individual briefing, but the best place for information on SGMA is to figure out which groundwater sustainability agency you are in, because that is the agency that's responsible for groundwater in your area. So the best thing you can do is attend those meetings. Most of them are online now or on webinars and not face-to-face. So there's a bunch of other places locally you can follow SGMA activities. We have our own department website where we list all of the water meetings that were made that people let us know about. We have an interested parties list. You can sign up for that as well. There's also sub-basin meetings that occur once a year where all of the GSAs and the sub-basins get together. And we also have regional water management, which is where we talk about integrated water management in Madera County. And so that meets once a month. But if you get on an interested parties list and then attend your own GSA meetings, you will have it in the bag. Those are the best places to learn about SGMA. So a lot of people, when they first learn about SGMA, have kind of a, how did we get here? How did we get to this point where we're restricting water use? And the best place to look is a chart that looks at land use. And in the Madera subbasin, you can see that there were some pretty significant shifts in crop types over the past, say, 20, 30 years. So for example, in terms of almonds, we've gone from around 22,000 acres to 75,000. We've about doubled the amount of pistachios. At the same time, grapes have remained pretty stable, and we've seen idle land go into production. So pretty significant land use changes that have got us to the point. So we've shifted from row crops to permanent crops, and permanent crops with higher water use. So I know none of that is a surprise if you followed any of the SGMA discussions, but I think it's good to go back. That's why we're having the conversations we're having right now. So there's really kind of two ways to deal with SGMA, and I'll talk about them from the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, GSA point of view, as well as the grower point of view. So the first place water managers go is to look for more water. So that might mean maximizing an existing contract for Central Valley Project water. Maybe you sold water in the past, you're now going to keep that water within your GSA. It might mean applying for water rights for flood flows. Most water managers are doing everything in their power to get as much water to stay within their boundaries as they can. But both of those things come with costs. So as a grower, you should be prepared to pay more, and maybe to think about where you might do recharge on your own property. So that's the supply augmentation side, meaning get more water in and keep it here, put it in the ground. The demand management side is different. So most GSAs that have a shortfall or a shortage in their groundwater balance are considering resting or repurposing land, and how to create a program that did that, maybe how to create a state pot of funds to do that. Other GSAs and the county GSAs, the three that the county manages, are developing an allocation and using satellite measurement of ET. You'll also hear discussions of a water market, and those are all ways of kind of decreasing demand, but maybe putting some flexibility in there. They all do come with costs, so growers, again, be prepared to pay more. And you may want to consider if there's land that you could take out of production that has been less, that produces less or has been problematic, there may be a way for you to concentrate plantings in one area rather than others. But those are kind of the conversations we hear people having right now. So we've talked a lot about the benefits from cover crops and the benefits of having healthier soil. including cover crops increasing water absorption and organic matter and suppressing weeds, healthier soils holding more water and losing less water to evaporation and to runoff. So in terms of SGMA, what you have to do is think strategically about cover crops, because if your GSA, if your Groundwater Sustainability Agency is measuring water use and cover crops are using water, you're going to want to be strategic about where you're putting them. And you're going to want to make sure that you're up on all of the studies in terms of what effect they might have on your soils and on your yields. And there have been a number of questions in the Q&A on kind of this growing body of research around this, but that's why we're presenting here and wrapping the regulatory programs into the presentation on cover crops. So that is all I have on my brief presentation, and I am able to pass it to Christina Beckstead, who is presenting on nitrate management.
Good afternoon. Were there any questions for Stephanie? Okay. All right, I will kick it off then. So my name is Christina Beckstead. Thank you, Stephanie, for the introduction, as well as Amy for the earlier introduction. I'm the Executive Director at Madera County Farm Bureau, and I've been assisting to help coordinate and facilitate the Chowchilla Management Zone under the Nitrate Control Program, which is a new regulatory program that's in effect for waste discharge permit holders. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen? My view changes, so.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So, as I said, we are a group of us, including the Madera County Farm Bureau, GEI, Ludorf and Scalmanini, and WaterWise have been working in the Chowchilla Management Zone over the last, well, since May of last year, so almost a year now, putting together a plan that is required by the Regional Water Board to essentially provide drinking water to residents that are impacted by nitrates. So our management team currently consists of Sarah Wolf, who's with WaterWise, myself, and Christy Robinson, also with WaterWise. And then our technical team is Vicki Kretzinger-Grabert with Ludorf and Scalmanini, as well as Barb Dalgish. And then we have Richard Meyerhoff from GEI. The Nitrate Control Program, as I previously mentioned, is a new groundwater solution, if you will, for those folks that have been impacted by nitrates. So the three goals of the program is to provide drinking water, safe drinking water to residents, reduce nitrate impacts to the water supplies, as well as restore the groundwater quality where it's reasonable, feasible, and practical. So ultimately, right now, we've been working on our short-term impacts and short-term solutions. But we'll work towards, as we move forward through this program, into looking at long-term solutions. Under the regulation, we currently have 35 years to find that long-term solution. So ultimately, the idea would be to hopefully get folks that are impacted by nitrates connected to a public system. So what we've been doing is trying to find out where the nitrate impacted areas are, as well, and then identify those residents and have their wells tested. We're collaborating with the stakeholders to determine that the proper water solutions are available to address these concerns. So looking at and talking to folks about what they prefer as their solution for their nitrate impacted well. And then we are also preparing, or have prepared, and will continue to prepare reports and submit information to the state to meet the regulatory requirements. And this program applies to all waste discharge permit holders. So for those folks include not only the farmers who fall under one waste discharge permit, which is under the East San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition, but it also applies to the cities as well as individual permit holders, including manufacturers and processors and folks like that, as well as individual dairies. So here we have a map of the average ambient nitrate conditions post 2000. But the purpose of this map, one, is to kind of show where we have potentially some nitrate issues, but also show the boundary of the Chowchilla Management Zone and the buffer zone that we have included in the plan and the areas that we intend to address. So you have the hard boundary line, this straight line here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. Let me see if I can. We can't highlight it at the moment. But so you have a hard boundary line. This is our actual boundary for the Chowchilla Management Zone. And then this dotted line here is the buffer zone that we're looking at to see how the nitrates impact our boundary. So on this map here, this is being used for folks to identify where their water is coming from. So the purple areas are public water systems. And the program is not intended for public water systems, but more for individual use or individual wells that are being impacted. The public water systems have specific criteria, which is why they're also included in this program, that they have to meet in order to provide and supply water to those folks that are connected to their system. So our focus is on these other areas outside of the purple. Although if there is an issue within the purple, we are wanting to identify that as well to make sure that that gets addressed with the city or whoever is managing the public system. And then this last map here is for well testing in target areas. So obviously under our program, we were given a very short time to put a plan together and to address and identify our problem areas. And although our intent is to cover the entire basin and make sure that anyone that is impacted within the basin is properly served with clean drinking water, we have targeted some areas, and that's these areas in red because they have a higher nitrate contamination based on the information that we've been able to gather through the process and through the different public sources that we have available to us. So because of a grant that we have that we've collaborated or coordinated with under the Regional Water Management Group, we have access to the ability to test wells under their grant program. And so we have focused the efforts on these red areas here. So a lot of people are asking how many wells they think, or we think that might be impacted. And so in the development of the plan, there was a lot of data analysis. We still have a lot of data gaps to fill. However, we have determined that there's probably somewhere in the ballpark of 700 to 800 wells. So above 10, and I'll get to this in the next slide, is where the water is considered non-potable, 10 MCLs. And then the 7.5 to the 10 MCLs is where it needs to be monitored because it's there's a chance that it could become non-potable water. So what do these numbers mean? So essentially what we will be doing through the management zone is someone from the management zone, if you think your well may have a problem, you would contact the management zone, go through an application process, and then we would send out one of our representatives that would go and test the well at your residence at no cost to you. Once the results are returned, they are provided to you. And then based on those results, we'll determine what's the best option for a water solution if there is a need for water. So in the red level, that means that the nitrate levels are unsafe. That's 10 and above. The 8 area, this orangey area, that means that the nitrate levels are high, but they're still safe. And what we will do is provide follow-up in the coming years to continue to monitor that well and make sure that it doesn't worsen. And so if it does test higher than 10, then that well would be provided with water in the future. And then you have the low to moderate range, which is your green to your yellow. And at this point, there's really no need for additional testing, at least within a few years under the current plan that we have in place. Now, moving forward is the plan expands and we work towards long-term solutions, we will address that and how to set up a system in testing wells and making sure that folks are still getting and maintaining clean water. So currently the options that are underway, so this plan actually takes effect tomorrow, May 7th, but under the Chowchilla Management Zone, because we have had the opportunity, sorry that my phone is ringing, but we have had the opportunity, because of our ability to work with the Regional Water Management Group, we have started testing ahead of schedule on the, than what the plan has started. So implementation for all of the management zones effectively starts on May 7th. But currently we are providing bottled water to any houses that are impacted by nitrates. We will be leading into and providing point of use devices. So essentially those little filters, like the pure filters that go on to your faucet in the kitchen. And then eventually we do intend, if the community feels that it's necessary, to install some water fill stations within the Chowchilla area. So alternatives to bottled water or the point of use system would be a filling station. This is something that we have included within our plan to possibly provide in Chowchilla, but we want to ensure that we get stakeholder input, that this is something that they want. It is considered a trusted source for safe drinking water. It would be available to the public at no cost. And as I mentioned, under the plan, we have included it, and we've included for installing up to 2 or having access to at least potentially 2 filling stations within the management zone. And then currently, as I previously mentioned, we are looking for people that are wanting to test their wells. So this program is all of Madera County, although we are focused in Chowchilla, but under the grant, it is open to anyone that would like to have their well tested within Madera County. So what we would need to do is just, you would need to contact us, and we will be able to get you the information that you need and set up a well testing date for you, and that is at no cost to you. And so we are partnered with, as part of that grant, Self-Help Industries is working with us, and they are doing the testing. So someone from Self-Help would contact you if you applied for this, and set up and explain to you what the program entails, as well as any other potential programs that might apply to you. So if there's any questions about that, you can reach Self-Help Enterprises. You can also email chowchilladrinkingwater@gmail.com. We also have a additional number that goes directly to the Chowchilla Management Zone, but I apologize, I don't have that with me at the moment, but I can get it to you and put it in the chat. And other than that, that's my presentation. So are there any questions for me? Okay, and with that, I will turn it back over to Amy. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, for your excellent presentation and finishing up the presentation with that. If anybody has any questions, if you can go ahead and use the chat option as well as the Q&A, we will take time to go through each of the questions that you guys may have. And what we could do is kind of see who the questions are pinpointed to. And if those presenters would like to answer those questions individually, we can do the questions that way. So let's see here. Looks like we have some questions. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I'm not seeing any new questions yet. And if anybody does have any additional questions after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to me by email and we can get those questions answered. And again, I thank all of you guys today for attending this presentation hosted by the Madera Chowchilla RCD. We greatly appreciate your attendance. And if you guys have any questions, again, reach out to me. But I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the excellent presenters that prepared the presentations for today. Thank you for all of your hard work in putting together this workshop as well. And again, if you guys have any questions, just let me know.
Amy?
Yes.
I see that there's a question here from the Modesto office regarding CV salts, and I'd like to take it if you have a moment.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
So the question is, with CV salts, will there be any on-farm incentive programs for growers to mitigate their nitrate leaching, similar to the Central Coast's cover crop credit? We anticipate that there will be something. We just haven't seen anything yet. And a lot of that, I think, is happening through the Irrigated Lands program. But the CV salts or the nitrate control program is really the solution for those that are impacted by nitrates. So although we are working with nitrates and working towards alleviating those nitrates in the future, that's really in conjunction with the Irrigated Lands program and the different coalitions. And our focus is making sure that folks have clean drinking water. So whether that's getting them bottled water, a point of use, or getting them connected to a city system or a larger public system is kind of where that stands. But we do anticipate to see something at some point, but that's still in the works. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, looks like Margaret has a question as well. When using a cover crop, when is nitrogen available? Year 1, 2, 3, or after working it under? So if you'd like to answer that, Margaret.
Hi, so I can, yeah, I think there is information on the literature about how quickly different cover crops break down and release nitrogen over time. I think it's usually a matter of weeks. So you would, you know, you'd need to be cover cropping every year, and then the release would be there. But one of the issues is, as I said, we measure the above ground biomass because it's easy to measure, and I feel like we really don't know as much about the below ground as we should, and I wish we did. And so that's an issue.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Please.
Yeah, so when using a cover crop, the nitrogen availability is often calculated depending on whether you work it under or leave it on the soil surface because of how the microbial community, so any nitrogen that's available from a cover crop actually first goes through the microbial community, and then it will be made available to plants in a mineral form. And so it's all being processed by microbes. And the way that it's usually calculated, there's a book it's very common, and it's for cover crops across the country. It's Managing Cover Crops Profitably through the SARE program. And they calculate that you'll get 50% of the nitrogen from a cover crop within the first year, but that the rest may sort of trickle in to a mineral form that the plant can take up later. And so, like Margaret was saying, the cover crop breaks down fairly quickly, but it's broken down by microbes. And so it goes into that soil biology, and having more and more active soil biology, meaning more microbes and more things to break down that plant matter, can then increase the availability of the nitrogen to you. But it does definitely depend on the species. A few of us have talked about the carbon to nitrogen ratio affects how quickly it's available. And so, like many things, it'll depend on what your system's like and what your microbial community is like in your soil for how quickly that happens.
Okay, just wanted to confirm if the question regarding, are there any cover crops that have allelopathic properties for organic orchards? Was that just covered as well? I just wanted to confirm. There's a new chat question.
This is Margaret.
I'm sorry,
well,
allelopathic.
Allelopathic. I think just what springs to mind, cereal rye, I believe, can be allelopathic sometimes. Sudan grass can be allelopathic sometimes, but mostly not. I would say I'm not aware of that. You'd have to look them up individually. Oh, another thing that's really interesting is the phasalias. You know, phasalia is a native California plant. We usually use lacy phasalia. It's really interesting. It's a wonderful pollinated plant. It was taken to Europe. It was domesticated. It's come back here, used as a cover crop. I've noticed at the PMC that seems to be allelopathic against cheeseweed, interestingly enough. But normally you don't use it as a, you know, it wouldn't be the only thing you'd be planting. And if you have a mixed cover crop, I don't think the allelopathic issues are so much of a problem.
Okay, great. And Cary Crum, I'm not sure if you're still on with us, but there was 2 questions for you. Were you working in almonds or walnuts or both? And also, did you say to plant the cover crops to within 4 feet of the tree row? So if you're still on with us, there's 2 more questions for you regarding your presentation. Okay, so I'm not sure if Cary's still on with us, but thank you again, all of you guys, for attending today. And it was a very great, successful workshop, and looking forward to more presentations in the future. So with that, I'd like to close this webinar. Thank you very much again for your time.